Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the presentation of the 2026 Governor's Budget. This is my fourth budget in this role as the Director of the Department of Finance. And in order for the Governor to present his budget to the legislature by January 10th of every year, I've witnessed remarkable, incredible work by the staff of the Department of Finance. This often means working through Thanksgiving, the rest of the holiday season, through the new year, sacrificing time with families. And I want to start just giving a special thanks to the entire staff at the Department of Finance, particularly to the PBMs who are here with us today, and also the executive team and CAP office, Christian, HD, Jennifer, Michelle, Millie, Marie, Caressa, Kenny, and Erica. I also like to thank our partners across the administration, the agencies and departments, and of course, the governor's office and their staff who have been amazing partners in always helping us do our job in ensuring the state has a complete and responsible fiscal plan. Lastly, I'd like to give a special thanks to the governor. I'm honored, and it's been so incredible to have this opportunity, and I'm forever grateful that he's provided me the chance to represent his administration in this role. With that said, I'm going to start by giving a high-level overview of the 2026 governor's budget, and then we'll open it up for questions afterwards. So just to start at a very high level, first we have a balanced budget that we're presenting to the legislature, so we're constitutionally required to do. And the overall approach we're taking, similar to last year, is really we're building a workload budget here. It means we're funding the costs, increases and changes for existing baseline programs and services, but we're not including any significant new adjustments or changes at the governor's budget, and really want to wait and monitor the changes in revenues and spending over the next coming months, as we did last year, really prepare for the May revise. And the plan is to ensure that we are taking everything into account and presenting a plan at the May revise that balances not only in the budget year, but also looks at the framework, the structure of the budget in the budget year beyond the budget year, and ensures that that year is also fiscally sound. With that said, this budget, and you'll notice in the 8 pages that were distributed, really focuses on continuing the progress that has been made through the prior investments of this administration along with the legislature. So there's been so many transformative investments, and the governor talked about a lot of them yesterday: education, public safety, childcare, housing, homelessness, combating the impacts of climate change. Across the board, these investments are being seen through in the budget, and they really are going to have beneficial, long-lasting impacts for the state and the residents of California for years to come. Lastly, kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but this budget really is about an eye towards ensuring that we have a sustainable fiscal plan going forward, not only in the budget year. And so we will maintain that focus on how we're going to address budget year +1 at the May revision. So this next slide and then following one are some probably familiar charts the governor often likes to present when he's presenting the budget, and they're important to note and to continue to point out because we have to be mindful of how we manage our revenues, particularly the volatility that we see in our revenue system. This first chart is a comparison of the big three: revenue, personal income tax, corp tax, and sales tax, as compared to personal income, which is a proxy for the economy. And you can see that while they often move in tandem, the revenue is generally been more volatile than the overall economy. In this next chart, also one that the governor often uses in his presentation, shows the capital gains forecast and past performance as a percentage of personal income. And this is important because you can see we've had these spikes to highs in capital gains. We've always seen corrections afterwards, and particularly when we saw the recent spike to an all-time high of 11.6% and a correction of over 60% in the subsequent 2 fiscal years. And we would expect to see a normal range of about 5% over time. And you can see in 2025, we're expecting a little bit higher, about 6.2%. I think this is important too, because you can see that where we have the volatility here kind of lines up with the volatility you'll see in our overall revenues. And this is important to point out because we've often talked about the state is, our revenues are reliant on high income earners purposely. We have a regressive tax system that the governor talked about yesterday. But because of this, we have a small number of taxpayers that account for a large portion of our personal income tax receipts. And for example, over the 20-year period through 2023, the top 1% averaged about 45% of our personal income tax liability. So for the 2026 governor's budget, the overall numbers, the governor talked about some of these yesterday. We have a $348.9 billion total budget. $248.3 billion of that is general fund and $23 billion in total reserves. The increase in general fund expenditures is up by about $18 billion over the Budget Act. But it's important to point out when we talk about the increase in expenditures that there are significant requirements due to Proposition 98 and Proposition 2. So we have constitutionally required spending increases when our revenues increase, and that is usually the biggest factor in our increase in spending. So again, as the governor mentioned yesterday, the budget has $23 billion in total reserves. This is over $7 billion higher than at the 2025 Budget Act. This includes $14.4 billion in rainy day fund, $4.5 billion in the special fund for economic uncertainties, and $4.1 billion in the public schools rainy day fund. The rainy day fund includes a $3 billion deposit in the budget year. We also are suspending a true up in the current year of $2.8 billion, and that's consistent with what we did in the 2025 Budget Act in terms of suspending the deposit in the current year. So paying down long-term debt, Governor also mentioned this yesterday, so I'll just note quickly, these are pursuant to Prop 2 debt payments, $11.8 billion over the next 4 years, $3 billion in 26, 27. About $2.5 billion of that is a supplemental PERS payment. So again, the big number that the governor mentioned yesterday in terms of revenues, our revenues are up in the budget window by approximately $42.3 billion before transfers. This is largely driven by personal income tax when not accounting for the impacts of the pass-through entity tax. The PIT represents about $36.7 billion of this increase in in revenues in the budget window. And when we talk about the budget window, we're talking about the prior year, 24-25, the current year, 25-26, and the budget year, and all those combined impact the bottom line of revenues that are available in the budget year. And so, as the slide points out, just comparing a little bit with the LAO, both forecasts were revised higher than the Budget Act. The governor's big three forecast, when we're just looking at the personal income tax, corp tax, and sales tax, which are the three components that the LAO would include in their forecast. So just comparing those as kind of apples to apples, we're 28.8 billion higher, or 4.7% when you look at a percentage basis. The biggest difference in the kind of factors in the forecast really is the LAO incorporated a significant risk of a stock market downturn into their forecast. We do not do that. We don't build in downturns, recessions into our forecast. What we do and have traditionally done is we note those as risks, and we talk about that in the 8 pages. And we do note that if there is a stock market correction to the tune of about 20%, that would have an impact of our on our revenues in the budget window to the degree of up to $30 billion. And then the note here is just that we assume modest growth going forward, while the LAO assumes that revenues will decline somewhat in 26, 27. So we do show a modest shortfall of 2.9 billion for that we were faced with accounting for at the governor's budget. And this is because after taking into the increased revenues into account, so you can see here, we started with a negative SFEU balance of 12.6 billion. When you factor in the increased non-Prop 98 expenditures, the Prop 98 portion of the new revenues, and then other miscellaneous adjustments, the big portion of this is transfers to the budget stabilization account. And then lastly, the need to have a positive SFEU balance, which is 4.5 billion, consistent with the level at the Budget Act. The remaining shortfall there is 2.9 billion. Important, I think, to note here that if we set the SFEU balance at a lower level, we potentially would not be facing a shortfall. The shortfall would be a lot smaller than we have here. And in terms of how we address the shortfall, the biggest component there really is the true-up, current year true-up, the BSA that I talked about earlier of 2.8 billion. And then, as you all are, most of you are all aware, the LAO was projecting a deficit of just under 18 billion, 17.6 billion when they did their forecast in November. And so if you see, compared to our deficit projection of 2.9 billion, difference is 14.7 billion. And you can see from this slide here that really, as talked about on prior slide, the biggest difference there is revenues, which is 31.5 billion. There's a difference here in terms of the revenues, because the prior slide was only, again, comparing the big three revenues, where we have an additional difference in revenue from other sources that were not factored into the LAO's forecast. So as I mentioned a little bit in the opening, this budget doesn't include new significant general fund initiatives, expenditures. It really is a workload budget and taking a very conservative approach to wait and see how things change for the preparation of the May revision. And so when we look at the just total workload and discretionary spending that we're adding, this is outside of population caseload changes, those types of things. It's 1.6 billion total in 26-27, primarily for higher education and ongoing projects, baseline adjustments, and as compared to total general fund spending, it represents less than 1% of total general fund expenditures. With that said, we are still seeing some ongoing baseline cost increases in some of our programs, some of our major general fund programs, and some of them have been growing at rates that are higher than what normal revenue growth rates projections would be. And so those are things that we are continuing to monitor and relate to the position of waiting to the May revise to take a holistic approach at that time in terms of any major changes that may be needed in order to meet the governor's priority of ensuring that the state has a solid fiscal foundation, not only in the budget year, but in the coming years. So quickly, I know we've gotten this question a lot, and so this slide just is the high level amount of what we're seeing in terms of costs driven by HR 1 in the budget in 26-27. It's approximately $1.4 billion. You can see the majority of this is in Medi-Cal due to 6 months eligibility redeterminations, reducing federal match for the limited scope services in Medi-Cal, and then the changes in hospital quality assurance fee, and then $300 million for CalFresh, and this is primarily due to the change in the amount the state is required to pay for administration. So a few of the highlights of the governor's budget, and he talked about a lot of these yesterday. But we'll just start with Prop 98. If you can see here, the guarantee level is $125.5 billion in the budget year. This has grown by almost 60% since 2018-19. It's the budget year proposes an all-time high of funding for the guarantee. We are paying off. There was a settlement that was created in the 24-25 budget year. It's approximately $1.9 billion. We are paying that off in this budget proposal. However, we are also creating a new settlement in 25-26, $5.6 billion. And this is really recognition of the volatility in revenues and the uncertainty there, something that we'll continue to monitor. And of course, will be updated at the May revision. But even with those actions, the pre-K to 12 schools are receiving approximately $18 billion more across the budget window than at the Budget Act. So again, the governor talked a little about this yesterday, but the California for All Kids initiative has really resulted in some transformative investments and changes to our education system that we should all be proud of. And as the governor mentioned, highest funding level for schools, highest per pupil funding level. Governor mentioned $27,418 per kids for all funds and $20,427 for general fund. Again, those are both all-time highs. And as the governor pointed out, we are seeing tangible results. The statewide assessments are showing meaningful gains in all grades, all subjects, with progress in closing achievement gaps. And that's for particularly also relates to categories such as African American and Latino students. Other investments for in the California for All Kids initiative. As Governor talked about, fully funding universal access to transitional kindergarten. Nearly 1 in 4 schools have adopted the community schools model now to date, and there's additional funding in the budget for additional expansion there. The before after summer school program, more than $4.6 billion now ongoing. It is served more than 1 million children so far. And then, of course, universal school meals, nearly 1 billion meals served each year. And so building on that and additional key investments in TK to 12 education in the budget, there's an additional block grant that we're proposing of $2.8 billion to really provide funds for school districts to be able to address increased costs. The COLA, LCFF COLA, estimated 2.1%, another $2 billion in additional discretionary funds for schools. We're paying off the deferrals in the budget, expanding, again, access to community schools, an additional $1 billion. This will provide support to the schools that have already adopted the model and then allow for increasing the program to additional schools. Investment in the Learning Recovery Emergency Block Grant, the final investment there. And then the special education base rate increase, which will now allow for full equalization of rates across the state. In higher education, we're fully paying off the deferrals for community colleges there and providing new ongoing funding for community college. There's $716.3 million in new ongoing resources for UC and CSU, and these are associated with commitments made in the compacts with those segments. They include funding for a 5% increase for the last year of the compact payment, and then also some partial funding of 40% of the prior year, of the fourth year of the compact that was agreed to as part of the 2025 budget agreement that deferred some of those payments. Also seeing increases in student financial aid of the amount here, the $688.4 million. The majority of that is for Cal grants, approximately just under $552 million. And one of the main drivers here is just the increase in resident undergraduate student growth, which is part of the compact goals with the segments. We're also continuing the investments of climate bond, $2.1 billion in the budget year, building off of the current year investments. And this includes an additional $314 million for wildfire and landscape resilience projects. Some of the new initiatives this year will be local fire prevention grants, fire resilience, and risk reduction related to transmissions. Finally, just on the budget, we'll note, the governor mentioned some of the other key highlights from yesterday relating to education governance, the extension of CalCompete's tax credit, which expires in 26-27, so that will 27-28, sorry, and that will provide some certainty for that important economic development tool for the state. We're also making funding for parks passes and farm to school permanent, which have been one-time funding commitments that have been made over the last few years. And then lastly, I'll just note the creation of a $200 million ZEV incentive program that uses non-general fund sources, GGRF, and air pollution control funds. So lastly, just risks to our forecast, both economic and revenue forecasts. Mentioned earlier a little bit about the stock market volatility and declines. This is important because a big driver we do know of our revenue performance to date has been the performance of the stock market, which was significantly higher through the remainder of the 2025 calendar year than we assumed in the Budget Act. And so that is a real risk there. We know a lot of that's been driven, there's a lot of talk about how it's been driven by the tech industry, particularly AI. And so if there were to be some changes there, it obviously would have an impact on our revenues. And then again, uncertainty about federal policy. We talked about this last year. The impacts of tariffs and immigration really are two of the key things that we're continuing to monitor that have had impacts, could have additional impacts on our forecasts going forward. And then again, the reemergence of inflation, some of that is a risk of the tariff policies, and the impacts of that would also be risks that we're monitoring and looking at. So that is the end of my presentation of the 2026 governor's budget, and happy to take any questions.
Just based on the figures provided today, increase the size of the state budget by $30 billion. Even acknowledge
So that's not what the governor is doing. And again, I think that first I would say it goes to the overall strategy here that I mentioned at the beginning and a couple times is, and we took this approach last year, and really is driven by a couple factors, but mainly we know that we've seen in recent years that there have been significant changes in our forecast between governor's budget and May revise. And the May revise and the governor feels strongly that's going to be his final budget proposal. And our plan does not include new significant investments. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the biggest factors in increased spending are from constitutional requirements, Prop 98, Prop 2. And also we are seeing increases in some of our entitlement programs, caseload increases, but we're not proposing, the governor's not proposing new significant spending. And we will continue to monitor where things are. And again, the plan is at May revise to ensure that we're not only balancing in the budget year, but looking beyond that. And that is what the governor plans to do.
sort of an emergency. He's not taking questions from us. Why are we hearing? Why did he have you? Do you have any sense of why?
Well, the governor previewed the budget yesterday, and in his State of State speech, and this is the beginning. The governor's budget is the beginning of the process, and again, the May revise will really be the framework for what the ultimate 26-27 budget entails, and he will be here to answer questions at that time. And as you alluded to, I had the privilege of presenting the budget last January myself, and so this is not unprecedented.
Obviously, the budget is one's priorities. With so much prioritization on education, are there any areas that you couldn't prioritize as much this time around, or are there any areas that, were cut for the sake of more investment into education? Just a little more clarification on, again, the additional investment we're seeing in the education field this time around in the budget.
And again, without having significant increases of spending, there also are no significant reductions or cuts to programs in the budget either. The focus here on in the slides and some of the stuff that the governor talked about yesterday is on education, but I encourage you to really look at the 8 pages, the document that was handed out. It really highlights all of the things that have been investments by this administration, along with the legislature over the last few years, the last 7 years, things that are currently have been implemented, are still being implemented, and really are the focus at this time, and ensuring that we are seeing through all of those investments. And there are transformational investments across policy areas, and those are laid out in the documents that you have.
Stephenshaw, on the $13.1 billion that's estimated to be a reduction in Medi-Cal because of the work requirements through 2029-30. Are you assuming that those work requirements the state will be implementing for the UIS population and other undocumented people on Medi-Cal?
The budget assumes that the work requirements would be applied uniformly.
Why is that?
When we are looking at the program as a whole, and given the change at the federal level, and even though we have a state-only program, it's been it is a state-only version of Medi-Cal. The budget assumes that the work requirements would apply to the Medi-Cal program.
To the state-only portion?
That's what the budget assumes.
That the AI bubble would burst. I know that you're not factoring in an economic downturn like the LAO.
Well, as I think noted, that's a downturn in the market is one of the top risks that we see out there to our revenue forecast, and we note, as I mentioned earlier, we do note what an example of what a correction similar to the correction from a couple of years ago would result in terms of downgrade in our revenue forecast. And so that is a top risk, not built in, but we never historically have never built in downturns. We note those as risks and note what that impact will be. So it's something that obviously we're monitoring, but we'll say in terms of revenues, we have seen a lot stronger performance than we anticipated at the 2025 Budget Act, and that's been driven in large part by what we've seen with the level of the stock market.
The deficit could rise to $22 billion just like 2 fiscal years from now. So why not address it now instead of you have to wait until May to address it?
Yeah, again, we've had the experience now, particularly coming out of the pandemic 2020 and the heightened uncertainty in forecasts since that time, that things will change between now and the May revision. This is really just a point in time snapshot of where we are, of where the administration, what the governor is thinking at this point. But we feel it's important to wait and see how things develop over the next couple of months, and then at the May revision, take appropriate action.
That there's going to be 1.3 billion less towards housing and homelessness than the previous budget year, which is a more than 50% reduction after your administration just touted improvements in the homelessness numbers. Can you explain that?
We can get you the details, but you'll see a lot of those changes year to year, and they're not due to cuts to any programs. Those are due to one-time funding sources that are no longer on the books. So that's likely the majority of that reduction that you're seeing there.
Director, can we talk about provider taxes? I'm a little confused about this MCO provision in here. It says it kind of has these 2 transition dates on it. Can you explain that? And can you also kind of get into what's going on with the hospital quality assurance fee?
So for the MCO transition date, we currently, we've assumed that the MCO tax is going to be approved into the end of the calendar year. We've gotten word to this point that we do have a transition period through the end of June. We're still working on ensuring that we can extend that transition period to the end of the calendar year.
Why is it that you think you can extend it to the end of December?
It's allowable under federal guidance, so it's something that our department and agency is working with CMS on.
Trying to get some like discretion from the feds to give us those extra 6 months.
Yes.
And then also on the hospital quality assurance fee, it's mentioned in here. Can you get into that a little bit more? How much are we losing from that?
So I think it's just over 630 million that we're losing for the budget year.
But is that the last fee that was like the 5-6 billion, or is that the increased fee that was like, I don't know, 9-10 billion?
It was, yeah, it's as compared to what we assumed in the budget.
Director, I'm curious, does this budget have any funding set aside for the Civic Media Fund, the friendship between California and Google on funding newsrooms? Is it still at $2 million, or is it?
Well, the money that was in the current budget is maintained. And so that is a program that's still currently being stood up at GoBiz.
What do you mean by money in the budget? The state was committed to give $10 million to that program for 2026-27 on top of the $10 million it gave last year. Is it going back on its deal with Google?
There's no going back on the deal. There were a number of, I think, the conversations evolved over time. It took well over a year to actually get to a final place where there was agreement on how the state would implement the program. And so we're maintaining that commitment that we made in the current Budget Act.
Any sense? I mean, are you now considering this year to be year one of the 5-year deal then?
I'm not sure. I understand that question, but we will. I'm looking to our PBM here, and we'll get those answers to you shortly before the end of the press conference.
Yeah, so just to confirm, there's no new funding then in this budget beyond what was approved in the budget trailer for last year, the $10 million?
There's no new funding in this budget.
Mr. Director, 2 questions here. Thanks for taking the time. First is the average person watching out there from San Diego to Bakersfield to Eureka. What do you want them to know about this budget for them? How will this impact them, number one? Number 2, what is the funding plan for high-speed rail?
So I think the thing that folks should know about this budget is, and this has been true of the budgets these past few years, and as we've weathered the downturn in our revenues, the governor has really maintained a focus on protecting the more vulnerable populations in our state and ensuring that we didn't make the same choices that we made during the Great Recession, and kept an eye on protecting programs that really provided direct support and money in individuals' pockets. This budget doesn't maintains full support for most of our programs that the residents of the state rely upon. Would also just reiterate that beyond that, it continues implementation of transformational investments that have been made over the last number of years.
Director,
Can you maybe give me an idea of what funding might be in here for Prop 36 for local governments?
So for Prop 36, there's opportunity for additional funds for programs that are going to be made possible through Prop 47 funding because of the revisions to the impact on the CDCR population from Prop 36. The impact of the proposition has been revised downward, and thus there will be more Prop 47 savings that can be dedicated towards programs.
Do you have an idea what those dollars might look like?
We can get them to you.
Mr. Stephenshaw, there's been a lot of conversations surrounding, the communities of Pasadena and Altadena. Is there anything that you could share that, how this budget would affect, those people trying to recover from the fires from last year?
Yeah, I just building off of what the governor was talking about yesterday. Obviously, it's been a focus of his and the administration since this time last year, and that's he was down there as I was presenting the budget last year. In the current budget, there's additional funds in 4 schools that were impacted. I think over $22 million, $22.9 million. There's also a 11.5 million that's dedicated to childcare facilities, infrastructure that were impacted by fires. And then the governor mentioned yesterday the intent to work with the legislature on a way to address one of the critical issues there, and that's the gap in funding that folks need to be able to rebuild their homes.
Let's talk about as far as rebuilding. Some of those people, those houses were underfunded by way of insurance. Are we talking about those?
Yes, yes.
Mr. Stephenshaw, is there more, can you talk about any additional funding that is being provided for the high-speed rail project that Governor Newsom mentioned in his State of the State address?
Yeah. So there's pursuant to SB 840 of from this past year, there's now $1 billion obviously dedicated from GGRF for high-speed rail, and that's maintained in the budget that we're presenting.
In this,
There's nothing additional at this point.
Director, to put a fine point on the federal policy changes, I mean, Pro Tem Lamone has acknowledged multiple times that the state cannot make up for the gap in its entirety that's going to be caused by these federal funding cuts when it comes to Medi-Cal, also CalFresh. So the budget proposal acknowledges that there's going to be additional costs by the state. Does that mean there will be no cuts? Do those additional dollars invested fund the programs in their entirety as they are right now, or are there still going to be cuts that are going to have to be made?
I mean, there will still be over time impacts to the programs due to the federal actions and the loss of federal funds or and the pullback of the federal support. The costs that are reflected in the budget, particularly in 1.4 billion, are mainly changes that were made that shifted costs to the state, like admin and CalFresh, where they're changing the admin ratio, and so states have to pick up those additional costs. In Medi-Cal, the big one, it was that they're no longer providing the 90% match for limited scope care. So that's a cost that the state has no choice but to pick up.
Then the 1.4 billion, including the 300 million for CalFresh, those are basically just the 26-27 year impacts of HR1. And are you saying that California's budget picture is good enough that the state can absorb those costs right now?
The governor's budget is balanced and assumes those costs. And so I think the overall costs within those programs, as well as the rest of the significant general fund programs for the state, are things that we will continue to monitor as we work towards the May revision.
So it does not account for the 1.8 million people that the governor said are at risk of losing Medi-Cal.
Well, that is the projected impact that will happen over time as those federal policies take effect.
So in other words, the 1.4 billion is costs to the state imposed by HR1 because of like administrative stuff you have to do and extra costs you have to pick up, but you are not in this budget proposing funds to backfill the caseload loss and to backfill benefits for people who are going to lose them under HR1.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Stephenshaw, can you clarify? I understand the shortfall is relatively small, but how exactly does this budget propose to fill the whole 2.9 billion?
So again, the majority of that is this 2.8 billion of a suspension of current year true up. So there's a current year requirement, current year true up to the BSA, given the significant increase in revenues in the current year, particularly capital gains. And kind of consistent with what we did at the 2025 Budget Act in suspending the deposit in the current year. We're also suspending that true up. And so that 2.8 billion is really how we address the bulk of the shortfall.
Director, you had a slide up there that talked about ongoing baseline cost increases outpacing revenue. Can you go into those a little bit about what those baseline costs are?
We've just we're seeing in some of our programs, particularly in the Health and Human Services area, that costs over time have been increasing over what we would think are reasonable revenue growth estimates, and we're continuing to see those. And so those are the, particularly in Health and Human Services, some of the programs there that we're monitoring. We took a number of steps last year, in particular related to Medi-Cal, where the solutions that we adopted as part of the 2025 budget were projected to result in approximately $12 billion in reduced costs over time. And so we've taken actions to really address the structural shortfalls that we do see. We are just saying now that we're continuing to see some, and that the intent is to monitor and make the appropriate changes at the May revision.
Besides Health and Human Services?
So, and if you look, there's where we see the general fund outside of Prop 98. Health and Human Services obviously is the biggest area. The other areas you'll just see, just in terms of where there is general fund, is higher education, corrections. So those are the areas where there is significant general fund, and so we obviously monitor all those programs.
Director, California is the only state in the nation that hasn't repaid the federal government its pandemic unemployment loan. California businesses are absorbing those costs right now that are rising every single year for them. Small, doesn't matter how many employees, doesn't matter what kind of employees. I mean, I know the governor last year said that he would try to make the case to the legislature to put money toward it, but I just want to confirm this budget does not put any money toward that loan either.
There's no money towards the principal of that loan in the budget. We're continuing to obviously monitor that and hopeful to have continued conversations with the legislature on ways that we can address it going forward.
Is there more volatility in this budget given federal cuts, revenue projections, this deficit than other budgets? How concerned are you?
Well, I think, and if you looked at the revenue slides that we had, I mean, you can just see in terms of revenue, we've experienced significant volatility over the last 25 years now, but particularly in the last 5 years. And so we just know that it's something that's inherent in our revenue structure, purposeful. It's a progressive revenue structure. And so the governor mentioned yesterday, we do not tax our lower income, middle income earners as much as high income earners. And so it's not a question of whether we have the right revenue structure. It's really how we manage that volatility in our revenues. And so that's why we continue to monitor things like these slides, is that these are really informative and really understanding how we can better monitor, better manage that volatility going forward. And the governor has talked about that in past budget presentations when we've talked about things about like how we could make changes to the Prop 2 requirements and save more money during downtimes. We created an account 2 years ago to put forecasted revenue, money that is forecasted to come in the upcoming budget year, but hasn't actually come in yet, to set that aside before we dedicate it. And so we really, I think overall, volatility is an issue that we face in terms of how we're managing our revenue, but it's something that we already know is an issue, one of the primary issues that we have to think about when we think about managing our budget. And we've taken steps, continue to take steps to be able to better manage that volatility going forward. With what we're seeing now, obviously the AI industry has been a driver of what we've seen in our revenues, and we know from the history of the markets that at some point there may be a downturn, but it's impossible to predict when that will actually happen. So we just need to prepare and be ready for that.
The federal cuts and volatility with the federal government right now, does that concern you? Like layering that on top of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course it concerns me, but it's something that obviously we've been facing for almost a year now, and we've learned from this past year, and we've managed, and we'll continue to be able to manage. Obviously, as Governor mentioned yesterday, 52 lawsuits prior to yesterday, and we've been able to protect a lot of federal funding for the state, and we'll continue to work to ensure that we're protecting the resources for the state.
Spending on homelessness, do you feel that what the state is spending is enough to keep decreasing it, the number of homelessness?
So we have invested significant amount over these last 7 years. The governor mentioned yesterday, prior to this administration, there were no significant investments at the state level in combating homelessness. There is additional $500 million that was part of the current year budget agreement that is set to go out early in the next fiscal year, pending agreement on some additional accountability measures, which is obviously important, very important to the governor. And there's still additional funding from current rounds of HAP that are going out. So there's still funding that's going out. There's additional $500 million in the budget year, and we'll obviously have conversations with the legislature on what the appropriate level will be as we work through this process.
Director, it looks like the DOF is assuming that roughly 500,000 people on Medi-Cal will not be on Medi-Cal, or at least enrollment will be 500,000 people smaller by this fiscal year. So I'm curious, one, is that because of redetermination or work requirements? And then two, if those people are expected to fall off of Medi-Cal, why isn't there more of an accounting for what we're going to do for healthcare for those folks? I mean, counties have already said that they're going to have to absorb this, and they're going to need resources to do that.
So as we do know, counties are responsible for indigent care, and the administration's in discussion with counties on kind of what some of their other costs may be. I think those are discussions that still need to happen over the coming months, because still not certain exactly what those costs, what the level of those cost pressures are. The impacts of kind of what's happening with the caseload are from those things that you mentioned, is also from the some of the initiatives that were part of the 2025 budget agreement.
So the moment and the
Yes.
Director, can you talk about how much money is this budget allocating to the DOJ to fight federal government?
I think there's an additional $10 million that we're providing over their baseline amount, which is around $15 million.
It's also adding $10 million to
Yes.
the 25-26 budget.
Yes.
So what is the total?
So 25 total.
25 total.
Yeah.
Are there any additional taxes, fees, fee increases in this budget?
There are no additional taxes in this budget. We're still working through trailer bill, and the trailer bill is, released on February 1st. And so often there are maybe fee increases within some of the smaller fee supported programs, particularly in the natural resources, environment world, but that's something that we're still working on, so to be determined.
Director,
There's no big fee increases, though, that are included in as part of the budget proposal at this point.
the Falcon tax credit is being extended at the same levels it has been previously, but that program has struggled to actually dole out that amount in funding. Can you speak to why the program is being extended at the same levels and if it will be changed at all to help companies qualify?
So at this point, we're not proposing changes to the program. I think we're, the program strict requirements on creating jobs and investments in the state, which are, important to maintain, but also is an important tool to drive investments, and so it's important to continue. We as we always think about changes to the program, we want to always balance ensuring that those investments make sense for the state.
Director, on the tariff rate, you're estimating, I think, a lower tariff rate than anticipated. Can you explain that a little bit? And is that contributing to the boost in revenue?
Yeah, so we are, that was part of our economic forecast. And I think in addition to what we're seeing in the stock market, we are seeing upgrade in our economic forecast over the governor's, over the Budget Act. And so that also has contributed somewhat to our increase in revenues. And so at the May revise last year, in our economic forecast, we forecast a 27% effective tariff rate, and it's revised down to around 17% now. And then obviously we see other impacts of that throughout the economy, particularly on the price of goods and things of that nature. And so they have the lower effective tariff rate is having, we're seeing as a positive impact on our economy, and thus our revenue forecast.
Mr. Director,
Can you talk
off the top of your head, are you able to say which state program or department is seeing the deepest cut in this budget at all?
Well, again, we're not proposing significant cuts in the budget. You may see changes in funding levels that are driven by one-time funding that is coming off the books, but it's one-time in nature. So that is what's supposed to happen. But we are not proposing significant new cuts at this point.
About Medi-Cal and what the spending looks like for this year compared to the last fiscal year, and also what you'll be looking at in terms of the May revise, what you'll be watching.
In terms of just Medi-Cal for May revise, or
Healthcare related issues.
Yeah, so I think we are continuing to see some increases in Medi-Cal as compared to the Budget Act. I think the increase in the current year is around $2 billion. Increase in the budget year is another $2.4 billion. The budget year increases have a lot to do with the loan that was provided and with the reduction in MCO revenues. We are, I think overall, there are so many moving pieces in Medi-Cal. Asked about some of them, where we're still trying to continue to assess the impacts of the federal changes, the impacts from the initiatives that were included in the current Budget Act, and then also continue to think about just overall the state's budget and a program now that I think is grown to, I want to say, I don't have my note here, about 44 billion general fund. 48 billion general fund in the budget year. And so as we just monitor all significant general fund spending, I think we'll continue to assess the program as a whole and have those conversations with the legislature and stakeholders.
Director, you mentioned the $500 million for homelessness will be contingent on performance or accountability requirements. Can you talk more about what that would consist of or entail?
We have language that we can provide. Okay. Well, I'll have, Teresa can give you the specifics on what at least what the measures are that we're in discussion with the legislature on.
Back on Medi-Cal, it just seems like broadly in this budget, I mean, it's such a huge part of the budget every year. It's a huge part of the HHS budget. It seems a little, I mean, doesn't it seem irresponsible to not even address what we know is coming in the federal government? HR 1 is law now. Before it passed, there was plenty of estimates about how many people could lose insurance in California, lose access to healthcare, and what that could cost in terms of federal dollars. So, I mean, are you expecting to be able to know that by May and figure out a solution by May? Or is that not something that we're thinking about this year?
So we have made adjustments at the governor's budget, and we've talked about some of those earlier. The previous estimates, a lot of those were broad estimates, given what was known at the time, which wasn't a lot. And we're still waiting on federal guidance for a lot of the changes that were made. And so we are, and as I mentioned, our agency and departments are in discussions with counties and understanding the impacts there. So we made the adjustments that we felt we reasonably understood at this point, and in the framework of the overall budget, and understanding that we are not taking significant major actions in either direction at this point, but knowing that we are continuing to monitor in real time and will over the next few months as we develop the May revision and receive additional information on what the cost will be in terms of like knowing the cost. There's been estimates, they're being revised, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to truly understand what the cost of the impacts of the federal change will be.
Right? I mean, is there any down payment or reassurance that there's a commitment to benefits and programs and beneficiaries? I mean, Medi-Cal is, covers, as you know, more than a third of the population.
So we are covering cost changes that will continue to provide some services to and access to certain populations. Overall, again, as we work through the May revision, this is not something we're well aware of, and we're having discussions and we're planning on assessing the whole program as we work towards the May revisions, and we'll make those decisions at that time and in the context of what it means for the overall budget.
Can you just help me understand, if medical costs are rising this year, how much of that is due to the federal policy changes, and how much of that is just because of California issues or health costs rising?
So in budget year 1.1 billion is for HR1. Oh yeah, so in budget year, the increase is 1.1 billion for HR1 that was highlighted earlier to answer your question.
So the majority of the cost isn't related to the federal policy.
Well, it's about $2 billion increase in the.
So half.
So in current year, there's 2 billion increase compared to budget act, and some of that increase is related.
Sorry, we can't hear back here.
Oh, sorry.
So in current year, the increase is 2 billion compared to the budget act. Some of that, and we can chat after, is related to federal actions, repayments of federal funds. As an example, in budget year, the increase is 2.4 billion compared to the budget act. And of that, we know for sure 1.1 billion is associated with HR1. But there are other things, as the director mentioned, there are a lot of moving pieces in Medi-Cal. So we'll get you more information on what, in the budget year, if there are other federal actions that also contribute to that 2.4.
Going back to the question about cuts, Director, I know you said there aren't steep cuts, but the proposal, the budget doesn't propose any of those steep cuts, but I think with the deficit and the reality, cuts are inevitable. So off the top of your head, do you know of any departments that are seeing some cuts, even if they're not significant, departments that aren't getting the full, extent of funding that they typically would?
I mean, there's no cuts being proposed now, so there's no departments that or programs that are seeing any funding that's being held back. Well, as mentioned, I mean, this is the approach we took last year. There's going to be changes between now and May, and some of those will be on the expenditure side, but we know that our revenue will be updated at May too. So we have to understand what the both sides of the ledger look like before we make those significant decisions.
It seems like there's not much revenue left over for anything outside of what's being proposed. With the current legislature and the session just beginning, there doesn't seem much room for any new programs this session. So not a lot can be done with anything fiscally. Is that right?
I think our position would be that this is not the time to make significant new investments and really focus on continued implementation. And so we'll have those conversations with the legislature as we go forward, but that would be our view.
Sorry, going back to immigrant eligibility and Medi-Cal again, healthcare reporter here. So some of those budget solutions last year included, for example, the freeze on enrollment and differential in benefits for certain populations. You mentioned that the budget assumes that work requirements would be applied across the board, including immigrant populations, even though that's not required by federal law since they don't have any say in that. How do you justify treating them the same in that regard when you're talking about work requirements and that burden versus the differential in eligibility and in benefits that we instituted last year? And then two, in talking to legislators, there are several prominent legislators who have said that they're going to be fighting for a restoration of those cuts. How possible do you see that in terms of California's budget picture? Is that an essential part to keeping these costs and the deficit low going forward?
From overall budget perspective, Medi-Cal is one of our biggest general fund programs. So it's something we're going to have to monitor. And as we think about how we balance the overall budget, we're going to have to think about what the appropriate level and what the program looks like. And that's what we're going to be doing over the next couple of months. But it's important for us to have those discussions with the legislature before we make any decisions there. So that's the work that we need to do over the coming months. It's part of the reason why we've constructed the budget the way we did, to allow us that time to do that work.
On immigrant eligibility for Medi-Cal again, it looks like some people who are non-citizens who previously were able to get full scope are now, because of federal requirements, being moved to restricted scope. But the state also has a state-only program, and it sounds like you're maintaining full scope for the state-only undocumented population, those who remain on the program. Is that correct? And how are you going to address that kind of differential in coverage for different immigrant populations, all of whom are under different legal statuses?
That is correct. And to have those folks on state-only full scope would result in additional general fund costs of approximately $1.1 billion. And so, again, goes to the impact of change from the federal government that the state can't afford to backfill. However, it's part of the broader discussion on the overall Medi-Cal program, and we know we're going to have that discussion with the legislature.
Can you explain the $5.6 billion holdback for schools after you already paid back the 1.9 from this year?
Yeah, I think that's just what we've seen in recognition of the volatility in our revenues. It's just appropriating less than the current guarantee level with that provides us the opportunity to monitor and ensure that given the volatility in their revenues, that we're not over appropriating at levels that end up being higher than the actual revenues that come in. And so it allows us to account for some of the volatility in our revenues, but also then we know we'll update at the May revision, and ultimately with the settle ups, we either pay them off or establish a plan once we certify this fiscal year next spring.
When would that be paid back?
Well, again, as with everything, we'll update our budget proposal in May. But to the extent there's still the settle up it still exists, then that will be paid back, or the plan establishing the payment terms would be set next spring. And that's required by law.
We have about 10 more minutes for questions, and then DOF staff will be available to answer any questions you have after the question.
And forgive me, Director, I'm not going to get the wording exactly right here, but I think when you were talking about the stock market and income revenue, you spoke about a 20% fluctuation that could result in 30 billion of a change. Could you just expand on that if I've given you enough information?
Yeah, no. So as I said, probably one of the biggest, or the biggest factor in the differences in the forecast of revenues between ourselves and the LAO is the LAO included a significant risk of a stock market downturn in their revenue forecast. We never do, but we note that as one of the risks to our forecast, which is what we typically do. And in that note, we explain that if we were to see a stock market correction of approximately 20%, we estimate that could have an impact on our revenues of between 25 and 30 billion, so up to 30 billion.
The number come from? Why choose 20%?
I think that was similar to the downturn that we saw in 2022.
Director, if the kind of like rosy projections for the stock market turn out to not be true, and in 4 months we need to make some significant cuts in the May revision, is the administration considering pursuing any reductions to state employees' compensation costs like it did in the last year?
Those are not part of the governor's proposal at this time, and I think it'd be premature to say what we will ultimately do. So I think we'll have to wait, of course, and see and monitor. But I will say that we complete our revenue forecast at the end of November. We actually saw the strength in the stock market persist through the end of the year, which is a good sign to the 25-26 revenues and to revenues that will be based on in 26 that based on the 2025 tax year. We also saw, as the governor mentioned yesterday, that PIT and Corp revenues in December came in just under 3 billion higher than was projected in our current governor's budget revenue, not as compared to the Budget Act. So we've already seen, at least in the first month, some stronger performance. So I think in the short term, what we've seen, particularly since our revenue forecast was completed, speaks to some continued strength as it relates to the 2025 calendar year, which will impact the taxes that we see over the next couple of months. With that said, of course, as we've talked about a lot today, we know that there's always possibilities of shocks happening that would have some negative effects on our forecast.
Director, if a shock like that happened, would the governor's office and the state consider looking at revenue raising initiatives?
I think that the governor's been clear on taxes at this point. We have done things in the past that have contributed on the revenue side. So of course we would explore all options, but the governor has been clear on his position on raising taxes on individuals and income taxes.
Can you clarify what the tax credit programs that are going to continue to be continued on are that the governor mentioned yesterday in the State of the State?
He mentioned the Cal Competes tax credit. That was the only one that we're proposing to extend. It expires in 27, 28. We're proposing to extend it for 5 more years. That's the only one, yes.
Director, there's a provision here on zero emission vehicle incentives. Is the administration hoping to design design that incentive to provide incentives or target incentives at particular manufacturers or exclude some manufacturers?
No, that's
So that would
not how we're intending to design the program.
So that would apply to roughly any manufacturer, Tesla, for example.
The details of, Joe mentioned that the trailer bill will be posted in February. We're still working on the specifics of the language.
Thanks.
Mr. Director, I'm sure it's somewhere in here. Yesterday, in the State of the State, the governor mentioned a fire rebuilding fund for fire victims, if I'm explaining it briefly there. Do you know how much he plans to allocate for that?
So, and that's, I know that's kind of briefly mentioned in response to a question earlier. There's no set amount at this point because it's a complicated issue, but we do recognize it that it's a real major issue that is faced in terms of an obstacle to ensuring that rebuilding is able to occur adequately. And so the governor mentioned yesterday his intent to work with the legislature over the coming months on developing the plan for how we be able to address that issue.
Director Rocco? No one else has one. On broadband, noticing that there's a delay or that there seems to be a pushback of, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was 500 million of funds, but either way, there's a pushback of funds to 2028. Is that the state admitting that it's not going to finish the middle mile broadband build out by the end of 2026 as initially promised?
No, it's not a pushback of the funds. We're extending the encumbrance expenditure date for the funds, which will allow to continue to pay staff and cover some of the operational costs as the program comes online.
Bring out the network past the initial December 31st, 2026 due date for getting it finished.
We'll get you the exact update on the timeline, but the real intent is to allow for the continued expenditure of those funds as the project is being operationalized. Okay. Thanks all. And again, HD is here, PBM's with any follow-up questions.
For those of you who don't have to